Okay, so today is Thursday, the 1st of September. The Tech Hour is out of holiday mode, and we've got off with a good start because there's about a dozen of us. And the topic is, on the one hand, the future of tech, which is the statement that Don Knuth made in 1990 when he stopped developing tech, and Tag PDF, which is a statement made by Mittelbach and Rowley. And I'm going to explain some proof of concept or exploratory work that I've done actually over a period of time, but I've tucked into it today and got some things to show. And I'd like to be able to discuss with you how this affects up potential for Tag PDF, and it's an alternative approach to the one being presented by Mittelbach and Rowley, although there are large elements in common as well. I'm going to introduce myself very briefly. I'm retired, which means I've got a very strict manager, wants everything done. I besides tech, I've got other interests such as mathematical research and what might be called personal development, or coming to terms with the facts of life. And I'd invite everybody else to just take a minute or two to introduce themselves. And if it's silent, I'll name somebody. Off you go, Nelson.
Okay, so I'm Nelson Beebe, and I think of the group here, I've been associated with tech and non-tech the longest since I started in the late 1970s with this work. So I've done lots of different things related to tech, including writing books and developing a huge bibliography archive, which I'm actually working on today. So that's all I have to say for the moment.
Okay, who's next? Carve, you got seniority.
Thanks. You mean I'm old? Okay. Yeah. So I'm Carve. My background is physics. I was a physicist, and something over 30 years ago, I started a company. In the early days of, I actually started with Adobe Illustrator version 1, and I produced the graphics diagrams for the very first book in the UK with computer generated illustrations that weren't drawn by hand. And I also, I'm also one of the, I think one of the first scientists, I shudder when Nelson's on the call, but I actually started in 1983. I was the first person in the University of London, so I knew tech, and I started offering that as a service to publishers to take tech files that they got on floppies, they didn't know what to do, I would convert them. So we're continuing with this. But what we're doing now, the main, if you like, what we're doing is we're creating XML files going from pure XML to PDF, EPUB, etc., fully automatically. And tech comes into that in several stages. So that's me.
So you're very slightly in the proprietary world. Who next? Richard. No, we don't have Richard. David.
I'm David Farmer. I'm a mathematician. I work at the American Institute of Mathematics, and I'm involved with the PreText project. So PreText is an authoring platform that truly separates content from presentation, something LaTeX was supposed to do, but in practice does not.
Okay, Paul Shamsi.
Hi, I'm Shamsi Brin. I work at Archive. Some of my colleagues that are on this call as well. I do user experience at Archive. So I am researching how Archive can help research become more accessible. It's an ambitious effort that we're working on right now. And we are talking to and listening to experts in the field, and being on this call is part of that process.
Let me follow Shancy. I'll be the first one to volunteer. So I'm the recently hired technical director of Archive, and I'm working along with Shancy as she does the research and figures out what's needed for accessibility. I'm trying to figure out how we can get there. And Shancy thought this meeting was so interesting, she put it on our Slack. So that's why we gathered up Stein, who's the science director for Archive, and David, who's actually in charge of our tech processing pipeline. He's the developer who handles the pipeline. So guys, you don't have to speak for yourselves because I just spoke for you.
Excellent.
I'm going to speak for myself while we're on a roll. Hi, I'm Stein. I'm a physicist. I started using TeX in '87 and promptly abandoned Trough, which I just started using a few months earlier. Haven't looked back since, although I'm thinking about trying out this LaTeX stuff. I'm the science director at Archive, part-time position. I'm normally a professor of astrophysics. And we are looking to catch up, including accommodating tech varieties or spin-offs that are popular in use and we can't accommodate currently because of infrastructure issues, and find out what's happening in the future and maybe provide some input on what would be useful for us from our user perspective and useful for us from our service to reader perspective, and also just because there are some cool toys apparently out there that we want to be able to use and provide feedback on.
Telly, I'd be really grateful if you could say something about how your work leads you to produce tagged PDF.
Sure. My name's Kelly Johnson, and I'm a fish biologist for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration on the US West Coast. And I'm in a group where each scientist writes 400+ page documents that has most of those pages are tables and figures. And within those documents, we need everything to be accessible. And we go from science to R Markdown to LaTeX and then a PDF. And it has multiple iterations. And so copying and pasting all of those figures into a Word document is not ideal. And I am a scientist with zero computer science training, but am self-taught and act as the IT specialist, I guess, for other scientists that are using R Markdown and know Markdown, but have very little knowledge of LaTeX.
Okay. Does anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to speak? Madeline.
Hi, I'm Madeline Rothberg, and I'm an accessibility researcher and consultant at the National Center for Accessible Media at GBH in Boston. And I, earlier this year, maybe late last year, was researching how to get accessible PDF out of LaTeX. And so when I heard that this meeting was going to discuss that, I thought I would come by and see if anybody's figured that out yet, because at the time of my research, it was clear that it could not be done. So thank you.
Okay, shall I start by explaining what's going on? So in 1990, Don Knuth said, I've frozen TeX. I know it's not perfect, but it's as good as I can make it. And it's good enough for me. So why should I make more work for myself? Because I've got a big book to write. This reminds me of the saying, if you want to get something done in a hurry, give it to somebody who's busy. And he said after as part of the statement for using TeX, you can put new stuff on the front end. In other words, you can pre-process the input before it goes in, and you can put new drivers at the back end. Now, at that time, TeX supported only what's called device independent, and it couldn't have supported PDF because this was in 1990 and PDF was 5 years in the future. And PostScript, I think, was just emerging. But DVI is device independent, so it can be made to work with any device, including dot matrix printers, if you remember them, and Nelson's written drivers for a lot of them. So that's how the back end sort of works. And that's how in the early days you managed to get illustrations appearing in that's how we got figures appearing in TeX documents. TeX doesn't know about figures, but we can put in the device independent file an instruction saying this figure goes here. And then the device driver creates the code that puts the figure there for whatever it is you're using, such as a PostScript printer or an image setter. Similarly, on the front end, Don Knuth had something called Literate Programming, where he wrote some very complicated, well, he had a different way of writing programs. So his programs looked like books and they're broken into paragraphs. And there's a lot of funny stuff going on to make it readable and so forth. And he wrote that in a special language, and then he translated that language into TeX input, which is a bit similar to what David Farmer is doing, for example, where you write in XML and then you translate it into TeX input or HTML for the browser. Of course, in 1990, XML didn't exist and the browser didn't exist, but the principle of writing a language that suits you and then translate it to suit the next object in the pipeline is quite reasonable. Now, in about 2020, a project from the LaTeX project to produce accessible or at least tagged PDF. A tagged PDF is something that's got tags in it. Accessible is something that people who are visually disabled, for example, can read. So they're different. One is a technical concept and the other is a human concept. But there's some rough equivalency between them. And what I'm going to talk about is approaching the problem of producing tagged PDF, but in a Knuthian way. And I'm going to do some screen sharing. So let's see if we can do that. Share screen, a window. That might be the one. Share. Now, does that look good enough? Are the fonts large enough for you? Yeah. Okay, so I've scripted some of the things I'm doing. So at the moment, the job folder is empty. And with a bit of luck, I'm going to typeset a very simple document. And I have to do it twice because it needs to correlate things. And I'll just show you the simple document. There it is. The only text in it is here. This is a simple example. But the horizontal size is very small and the baseline skip is very small. And so we get 2 pages. And the problem with tagged PDF is, one of the problems is to tell the screen reader that when you get to the end of the line, you go on to the next one. And when you get to the end of the page, you go on to the next page. Okay, so just so that everything's clear, you see that I've created a folder called no tag in the job folder. I just created that. And it's got 3 files in it. Why has it got a DVI file? I'm sorry, something strange has happened. I've messed with one of the scripts and I've got a DVI file.
Double check your command line.
Yeah, that's what I've done. And so now I'll run it. And now this job, thanks for that. Okay, so now I've got a log file and a PDF file. That was the command I ran last time. Let me see, okay, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to use the tagging stuff that Ulrike Fischer of the LaTeX team has very kindly written. So this is depending on the work of the LaTeX team, and I'm using that work to create a tagged PDF. And we have to do it a couple of times. And now we've got two folders here. We've got a tag folder. Now, if I show you my file again, my simple doc, you notice here that I've added logging of the output. And that means that every time a box is shipped out, I get a whole bunch of stuff in the log file. And to make it easier to understand what's going on, I've written a little utility that extracts the boxes from the log file. We'll see what this does in a moment. So we'll do it with both of these. So job, no tag. Oh, sorry, I've just done no tag. We want tagged. Okay, so now if I do ls job tagged, no tag, you see I've got two boxes, one for each page, and we'll look at for page 1.box, and I'll just show it on the screen. It's not a big file because it's not much to see here. I want to say it's not a big file. If you see here, I'll just show this bit. This is the interesting bit in some sense, particularly to the sighted person. Do you see we've got this is a SIM and then there's a hyphen. So this is what we get out of TeX before, or from LaTeX, before the work of the LaTeX 3 team on tagging. And the stuff that I've highlighted is the stuff that's visible in the PDF. Everything else is spacing. Space is almost by definition invisible. And although sometimes you have a very audible silence, a silence that is deafening, and so to speak, administrative stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the same part of the file, in fact, the same file, but for the tagged version. So, okay, so this is what has been added by the tagging project produced by the LaTeX 3 team. And here, this bit here is exactly the same because it's the visible bit, and we want it to be exactly the same because adding tags shouldn't change what we see, it shouldn't change the visual experience. But you notice here, we've got a PDF literal command. And what this does is it puts something into the PDF file. And here we've got another PDF literal file command. So I'm now going to do something very geeky and very impressive, which is I'm going to compare the before and after the page 1 files. So I have a tool in Unix that does this, the difference tool. And at this point, sorry, we a little bit scrolled off, but yeah, we've almost got it all here. Yeah. At this point, we've got something that is really worth our understanding from a technical point of view. And it also tells us a lot about the architecture of what's going on. So this is a little bit like in a wind tunnel at low speeds, you put little tufts on the surface of the aeroplane or whatever it is you're investigating. So you've got a visual indicator of where the wind's blowing. And you can also put plumes of smoke into the wind tunnel so you can visually see the motion of the air. And this diff is allowing us to visually see what is being added by the work of the LaTeX team to do tag PDF. And this that they've added is essentially what any system has to do. Any system that produces tagged PDF has to do the same or similar as what the LaTeX people are doing. So we can't say we can do away with this. We have to do the same stuff, but maybe we can do it different and better. And that's where the difference between the Knuthian approach that I wish to take and the, so to speak, integrated approach that the LaTeX team wants to approach. So let me talk about this fairly slowly, line by line. So PDF literal means put the following thing into the PDF file. We are directly writing something into the PDF file that comes out at the very point the PDF writer is at. Now, the marks for, and then this value here, is information that LaTeX is using to find out where it is on the page. So this is something that LaTeX is using, is sort of tagging the bits of the page so that later on it can know where the page break came and where the line break came. So it allows us to say what it's for LaTeX own use. That's the point, is the marks is something LaTeX holds in order to do the calculation. The marks don't go into the PDF. PDF interword space on is some command that's understood by the PDF backend. The right here is LaTeX storing some information in a file. It doesn't affect the resulting PDF. Then we get another PDF literal, another write, some more marks. What's sort of interesting here is that we've added a kern of 0 points and an empty horizontal box that I think seems to contain a PDF literal. I can't be, yeah, which contains a PDF literal. So it's doing something there that might not actually be necessary. And then there's another PDF literal, more marks, PDF literal, more marks. So this is the information that is being added, and you can think of it as the PDF, as the box we're shipping out being a collection of commands. Each line here that we're seeing is a command, and we're interleaving some extra commands in. And we notice that because everything is a greater than sign, there's no less than signs. What's happening is we're adding things to the box. So the main thing we want to get out of this is that PDF LaTeX, when it implements tagging, adds things to the box that is then output to produce the PDF page. So having done it once, the second time should be easier. And to compare it, what we have to do is do the same command, but for page 2. And now it all looks very familiar, doesn't it? It's all very much the same. This is jolly interesting. We add a box, we kern to the top of the page or something. Then we put in a horizontal box that's empty, and then we kern to the bottom of the page or something. I don't know quite what's happening there, but for some reason it's adding that. But the main thing is we're adding these PDF literals, and that's adding the tagging. So at that point, I think I can actually stop screen sharing. But before I do that, are there any questions? Charles, is that a question in your comment? Or contribution of information?
That was answer to me. I asked the question, what does 40A, 53, etc. mean?
Oh yeah. It's telling us how many lines we have to skip until there's the next difference. So diff shows only the differences, and between the differences, we say how far you have to jump. So this is quite interesting. This 48A, 68, 70 is similar in some sense to what the marks are doing. The marks are saying where we've got to in various forms or stages. Is there any more? We've got Doug McKenna come in, I have to admit him. Hi, Doug, we're in the middle of a demo. Welcome.
So, Jonathan, my question is, these tags don't seem very meaningful. Is that simply because the example isn't particularly interesting?
So, sorry, could you repeat the question because I'm a bit slow?
The tags don't seem to be very meaningful.
Oh yeah, the issue here is that there's not very complicated structure that we need to take care of. The main thing is that the tags, you know, in LaTeX, you have, I'll call them IDs. You labels. You have labels, and you label an equation, and then you reference the label. So the tags are similar to this, that they say this piece of the document has got this name, and when you get to this point in the reading, you jump to the piece that's got the following name. So you're right that because the document is simple, the tagging is quite simple. And I have done a complicated document in that way, but I haven't started to analyze it. I could show you it afterwards, but it's actually a bit hairy, and I think we have to understand the basic principle first. This is the 2 + 2 and 3 + 5 1/2 + 1/4 sort of stage of things. So yes, but the thing that is true in the complicated example and in the simple example is that the tagging is adding things to the box that we're seeing that go straight into the PDF file. And everything else that's added, pretty much, is there as an artifact of the calculation. So, you know, when you sort of do a drawing, you might put in some pencil lines to show you where things go, and then you do the drawing. So these marks and the write commands are there so that the right things can be put in the PDF file when we come around to do it the second time. So these are intermediates. So some of it, the marks here, are intermediate stages in the calculation. They're used for internally by LaTeX, but they don't go into the PDF file. Whereas the PDF literal does go into the PDF file.
So this is Madeline with the very basic does it work question. Does this produce a PDF with tags with something useful in them?
Yes. So the way this box that you're looking at came out is that to produce a PDF file, TeX does a series of ship out commands, and ship out needs a box. So when you ship something out of TeX, it has to be a box that you ship out. And I've set up TeX so that before it ships out a box, it writes into the log file the contents of the box. So this is exactly, sorry, if we do this is exactly the box that is being shipped out to give us page 1. And the reason why that's important is that you can see that here we've got a VBox. That's a command. VBox is actually a TeX command, and you can call that VBox command directly, and you can set its dimensions directly if you want to. And then it contains an HBox, and then it contains a kern, and then it contains glue. All of these things are TeX commands. So you can actually, from this description here, you can actually construct the same box as the one that's being shipped out. And the reason why that's important is if we go to the Note Act, version, job. Okay, so when we typeset the thing without the tagging work, we don't get any of the tags in, and we have to insert them in. So the problem of producing an accessible PDF is two problems. The one is knowing what to insert where. What do we need to insert where to produce the tag PDF? And the second thing is performing that insertion so it goes out into LaTeX. And what I'm suggesting is that we separate out those two problems and do them using different tools. So if we can write a tool that starts with the box which starts with a description like this and adds in the tags in this description, we can then ship it out even though LaTeX didn't create it. To put it another way, if we look at this diff, our task, ignore the marks, ignore the rights, just look at the PDF literals. What we have to do is we have to put these literals into the box file at the right spaces with the right values. So one of the values is this value here, LaTeX 3 PDF 1. BDC. I don't know quite what that means, but it's probably move on to the next page. And if we look at page 2, we get page 2 BDC. And I actually don't know. I actually haven't gone into all of this, so I don't know what it's doing. But if we put the right commands of this nature into the text file I showed you, then fairly straightforward software will then do the rest of the job for you. I think I should stop sharing at this point because it's going to take some sort of face-to-face communication to answer the questions. So I'm going to stop the sharing. I can resume sharing if I want, if we need to. Now, I suspect that some of you might be a bit disappointed, or what's the word? Puzzled. And
Kelly has a hand up.
oh, sorry, who does?
I
Kelly.
do, Jonathan.
Yeah. Sorry, Kelly.
No worries. I have just a basic question on
Good.
what do you think the #1 benefit of having the process be separate is?
It's easier.
Well, that's a perspective.
It's easier software. It makes writing the software easier.
Can you give an example, Jonathan, a sort of baby example of where if you separate, there are a lot of things where you separate, things do get easier, but can you give an example so we can understand?
Okay, suppose you want to do tables. So you typeset a table, and you ship out a box, and then by hand, you put the tags needed in to achieve accessibility. You immediately have something that can be tested with people who are visually impaired. The other is that you now have a specification for what the output must be. Because you can say, the tagged PDF must agree precisely with this. And if on the basis of testing with users, you find that you need to change the tagging, you can then change the tagging by hand. And you've got a new acceptance test immediately.
Is this intended to be the final product?
This is intended to be part of the architecture of the final product.
So in what you described, what happens when I make a change to the text and rerun it?
Okay. What happens is that you typeset it without tagging. You don't use any of the PDF tagging software that LaTeX provides. You typeset it without tagging, and you use the tools that I've shown you to create these box files, one for each page. You then use external tools to add the tagging to the box files. And then you use an external tool to create a text source file that's very, very strange, whose purpose is to exactly create the box whose description you just fed to it. Another way of looking at it is
which version of the file should the author then work on going forward?
The author should work on the source LaTeX file as they presently do.
Is the box file in such a form that if I significantly rearrange the text file, the boxes will get applied to the correct places?
The box file is always regenerated.
Sorry, not the box file. You're making an extra, the author needs to make an extra input file to add the tagging, right?
In the first instance, some suitable person adds tags by hand to the box file. And it's very much a handcrafted thing.
But then I change the text and recompile, and that goes away.
Yeah, so then the challenge is to automate the process for variable input. And essentially, you implement the same algorithms that the LaTeX people are implementing, but you're not writing them using TeX macros. You're writing them using a programming language such as Python, which everybody understands, and which has got lots of capabilities. Now, you may need to put in some additional information into the output file so you can get the same sort of information that the LaTeX gets from write commands and mark commands. And probably my idea is those can be put into the source file because it understands the markup of the source file.
Yes, without markers, this is not going to be a reliable process.
That's right. And without reliable markers, game over.
So if the author has to put in the markers, maybe I'm confused with just how long.
What I'm saying is, without marks appearing internally to the process, it's game over. We have to know that this is the beginning.
Internally.
Yeah. What LaTeX are trying to do is observe the typesetting process and on the basis of that, put the marks in. I'm happy for that to be done if it works reliably. But the alternative is, because you understand the source document and can translate it to XML anyway.
I'm
There's another
highly,
way to put marks in.
I'm highly confused.
Okay.
Why don't we just? So a lot of this seems to me because the base TeX language is considered inviolable. We can't go and change TeX to say, hey, let's add annotation commands to TeX.
That's not the problem, because none of the stuff is being run using Don Knuth's TeX. The stuff I've shown you is done using PDF LaTeX, which is far from inviolable.
Okay, so why don't we just invent the syntax for properly annotating TeX and support it and start encouraging authors to put it in their documents, even if it does no good right now, but then use that as a starting point to pass the tags all the way through to the PDF.
I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with that. To go to David Farmer, if he's got an XML file, he doesn't need LaTeX to tell him where things start and when finish and so forth. He's got complete control of it. So what he'd like is a LaTeX syntax that allows him to provide the additional information that he already has.
Yes, if we invented the LaTeX syntax, he could probably start outputting it tomorrow.
Yeah, the only trick is that there is one thing that is difficult, which is typesetting involves breaking things. It involves breaking words, it involves breaking paragraphs into lines, and it involves breaking paragraph, building up pages. So all these sorts of breaking things all have to be indicated in the PDF file. And the marks that LaTeX are putting in is its way of controlling all of that. But there are other ways of doing things. There's a commonality that has to exist, and
I'm not sure what line breaking or even page breaking has to do with the process. In the general case, I would assume those would be irrelevant to a non-sighted person.
No, they're highly important, because if you've got two-column layout on a grid, you can't tell reliably whether it's a table or two columns. This is the old thing.
That's part of the problem with PDF, but I get where you're going.
Yeah, that's the problem with PDF. And so if you're delivering a PDF, you have to say, this is not a table, this is a paragraph. At the end of this line of the paragraph, you move on to the next line. And that's what all these tagging is about, is linking the thing together so that you follow the arrows.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay.
And that's why they put the marks in the file.
Right. Right. Okay. I'll just state, this is why we at Archive are trying to move as quickly as we can toward outputting HTML from our TeX and LaTeX primarily to make it more accessible because it's a lot less encumbered than PDF.
It's also a preferred output medium for many people.
Interestingly enough, our user base doesn't seem to think so. But I think that's because our user base has dealt with PDF so many years, and I'm referring primarily to our cited user base, that they kind of can't imagine the other approach. But I think when we start offering them the choice of viewing an HTML version of the document versus the PDF version of the document, I expect more and more of them to view the HTML version of the document. Particularly those who are trying to get a quick glance at, a paper that was just published, but they're outside on their phone, where right now the PDF is almost completely unmanageable, and the HTML would likely give a good result. And this is even aside from visually impaired people.
So can I understand this? If if our document, rather than starting with a text file, supposing that had been converted into a nice structured XML file, the problem is much easier. Is that right, Jonathan? So
yes, it is. For example, if it's an XML file, you know when the paragraph begins and you've got complete control over what happens at the beginning and the end of a paragraph.
Yeah.
The only problem you've got, if you like, is putting in the PDF tags that relate to the breaking of words and paragraphs and that sort of thing.
but from a simplistic point of view, you put those tags in. Yeah, I can't think, but basically it has to ignore hyphenation and page break, what have you. You got the beginning of the paragraph, you got the end of the paragraph. So
Yeah.
Hmm.
You have to. There's two things going on here. There's three things going on. The first, which is what Charles has said, mentioned by Charles, is that HTML is in a number of ways a better output than tagged PDF. And I agree with that. The second is what needs to be done to create tagged PDF, whatever architecture you use. And then the third thing is what are the relative benefits and disadvantages of the architecture I'm proposing and the architecture that the LaTeX team are bringing forward. So I've, if you like, focused today on something that's third in the list of important things. The first thing is HTML, XML, or PDF. What's the relationship between them? The second is what has to be done to solve the tagged PDF problem, whatever architecture you use. And then the third thing is what architecture to choose. So the merits of my architecture versus the Mittelbach Rowley architecture has got certain preliminaries to it to get there. And the best thing I can say, one of the things I can say in favor of my architecture is that I have relatively quickly brought you to the heart of the problem. Which indicates that it might be a simpler architecture and an architecture that is focused on the problem that has to be solved. But however persuasive I am, nothing would be more persuasive than me actually producing tagged PDFs.
So I think, Jonathan, with all due respect, where I am now is we've had a discussion with Frank Mittelbach and his team, and we've seen your demo. And the net result is that I'm very confused. I would need a more technical exposition of the differences between the two approaches.
That seems to me like a very sensible request and a very sensible
and preferably actually via documentation.
Sorry, with documentation.
Preferably via documentation. If hopefully the documentation isn't completely in the weeds, but is basically, I'd like to see, you know, a good, concise technical architecture description of both approaches.
I'd be very happy to do that.
I will say again on behalf of Archive, aside from the fact that we want to produce HTML as the ultimate means of being accessible, we probably still have a requirement to produce the most accessible PDF we can.
Yeah.
So we're still kind of in the game of learning, you know, what the approaches to that are.
Let me give you another advantage, which is that the only change I made to create the box files was to add some diagnostic information, to add commands that produce diagnostic information. So everything in the archive can produce box files.
I think I understand what your approach is, and
Okay.
and there may be advantage to the fact that you're in essence doing it automatically. And that was the part I had trouble on, right? Is wait a minute, you're tagging, but the author isn't specifying the tagging. And now I kind of get it. What you're doing actually is outputting information that would normally be lost.
Yeah.
The example, is this a 2-column document or is it a table? And then it's up to the downstream to start making use of that. And I think what you were trying to say is someone could write a Python program or something, that it's not going to be too hard to create the downstream program that makes use of that.
It'll
Like,
be easier than writing in later macros.
I could probably grab a student to do that. Right. So that part is interesting, but I would also like to give fair justice to getting more detail on Frank Mittelbach's approach, because I thought his approach was marking up the text source. And I mean,
his goal is that very little, few changes to the source documents are required. That's what he's hoping.
okay.
I think the dual. I think that may be optimistic.
I'm going to have some people look at this in a way I don't actually have time to do with all my other responsibilities. But depending on the state of our funding, those people might be grad students or even undergraduates. And we'll see what we can get. But
just a comment from me, if I may. I think so. Yeah, I think what the LaTeX 3 team are doing is a sort of pure approach right from the start. A lot of tech programming, correct me if I'm wrong, but press the button and everything is tagged correctly. Tech is a very difficult thing to program because it's very unusual in many, many ways. You have to be a techie to program tech. I'm not even near a tech programmer, although I've used it for many years. So I like, both approaches I think are interesting, and they've got great results. There was a I think, who's it? There was a good presentation on it showing how it's done. But I like Jonathan's approach because it's sometimes the problem becomes much simpler when you divide it. So Jonathan is writing out, as you say, Charles, the information that's normally hidden and chucked away. He's writing those, and then he's post-processing with a sort of, or a simple program like Python or something else, from what I understand. So
yeah, on the other hand, Frank described what they're doing. The essence of what they're doing is changing the text processing to keep the information that's normally thrown away at the end of each page. So they, as you say, the pure approach, because they may have the advantage in certain cases of having more information available to them than Jonathan's approach would have.
Yeah, gotta watch both.
I would hope that in many situations, both processes will produce the same results using the same algorithms, but with different implementations.
So you have to be careful when you use the word "the same" to a software engineer like me, because if you say that, I presume bit for bit identical, whereas I think what do you mean bit for bit identical, or do you mean the same?
That's what I mean.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
I mean, it bothers me that the difference between the tagged and untagged PDF box, tagged and untagged boxes produced by LaTeX differ by things that are not related to tagging. That you get this extra typesetting stuff in appearing. That sort of bothers me, and I see no reason why the untagged output should not be the description of the box that's shipped out once we've stripped the tagging out. So if the box that's shipped out should be the same whether it's tagged or untagged, except the tagged has got the tags added. And I expect the tags to be the same in both cases, because I can't see why they should have to be different.
That all depends on, I think you're presuming a very precise and universal agreement on what the tags should be.
Yeah, well, that's part of the game. That the tags that to be used are part of the input to the whole process. It does make things a lot easier if you can say byte by byte identical is what we mean by the same. I see a big software development benefit to that, and it's something that's part of the blood of tech. That it produces identical outputs given identical input, and that's something I have that's sort of one of my motivations. But my main one is that it gives a better development process. But the development process has got a number of advantages. I don't see it at this stage as being an either or. The ability to create sample tagged PDFs without being able to create them automatically is a great help in terms of testing and getting user acceptance and promoting the whole thing. So if you're going to handcraft your tagging, my approach is the way to do it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can I find this specification for the tagging, for the tags you say are going to be output and the tags that did that specification come from, is that Adobe's tag PDF specification?
The tag PDF specification is quite broad, and it's certainly not specific enough to give you byte by byte equality. And in particular, it doesn't have rules about how the IDs are generated. I know not very much about tagged PDF. So I work on the basis that whatever LaTeX outputs, whatever LaTeX actually outputs, is the correct value.
Your tags are identical to their tags because you're accepting their tags as the standard.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes something clearer to me.
Yeah. It's easier for me.
So wait a minute. Pardon me again. So part of your argument is that your tools are simpler and quicker than theirs, but if their tools are already producing output, why does it matter? I thought there were cases they weren't handling yet.
Yeah, they haven't done tables or mathematics yet, for example. And they won't be doing them for several years.
Okay.
Yeah, so from what I understand, sorry to jump in, but what they're doing, they've got great tagged PDF that's working, and it knows where the paragraph starts, ends, etc. Great work, but it's not finished. So if that works, Jonathan wants to reproduce that. Again, just to try, I'm trying to think aloud and understand it. What Jonathan is saying, if supposing in future a new kind of table comes along, which is really complicated, and you want to fix that, you've got to go into the guts of tech and start hacking that and then programming, which is very difficult. In Jonathan's case, correct me if I'm wrong, all you've got to do is to go into your post processor in your Python and correct that. Is that correct, Jonathan?
Yeah, pretty much. As you were speaking, I had in mind CSS. So with CSS, the way it worked, which was a great invention in HTML, it sort of had unanimous support almost before it was launched. And there you separate out, you put tags onto you put class statements onto the HTML elements. And then in another piece of software, the CSS file, you translate those into visual appearance and so forth. So what I have in mind is that the box has information in it that tells it that this is linked to that and so forth. And then a Python's program or something similar to it actually does the styling, adds the sort of linking that the tags require. And if the PDF standard allows more sophisticated interactivity with screen readers, you shouldn't need to change anything upstream of the box. It's only downstream from the box that anything needs to change. And that's like the situation with CSS, where you can change the fonts and the borders and all sorts of other things without changing the HTML file.
Well, another property of CSS is that you can apply it by tag without even having the class statements on the tag. So is that going to be true of what you're saying, that there's in effect a default set of tags that get applied to standard LaTeX output on its way to PDF?
If this thing gets to fruition, then one of the components will be how do you translate the information we've got into PDF?
Okay.
Into PDF fragments.
Is what you showed us the LaTeX Teams tool?
Yeah, what I showed you was I took the LaTeX Teams tool and I asked it to, using standard TeX commands, to show me the boxes every time it did a ship out. So I'm looking at the boxes that LaTeX is producing,
Right.
and I'm saying if we look at those boxes, we can see what the problem we need to solve is. Our problem is to produce those boxes.
I see.
And that's the problem they have solved. I'm not claiming that I'm the first to solve that problem. What I'm saying is that having discovered that there is a solution, perhaps we can produce a better one.
Okay, I may end up sending a student your way for you to explain this process.
Very
and
welcome.
see, but that will be a little while hence. The students are just starting to show up at the university. And there's competitions for grabbing them. So.
Okay. Well, if they're interested in mathematics, there's a diversion there as well. I can chat to them about mathematics.
I was going to get CS students, but it might actually be easier to get math students because they have fewer internship/employment opportunities.
Yeah, a math student would be fine, I think. I don't think it requires a lot of computer science. And they'd certainly be more motivated, I think, than
The literature majors are showing up at school knowing how to program nowadays, so we'll see.
Yeah, I'll take anybody.
We have an agriculture school. I should be careful that this is being recorded before I say something about farmers.
We'll stop that. It's now an hour and 10 minutes. If anybody wants to go, they're welcome to go. You wouldn't be rude at all to say your goodbyes. And I'll give a moment or two for that to happen. I'm really pleased with the discussion we've had. And I think that the interest is very encouraging. And the progress is also, I think, very, very encouraging. And it makes me want to, demonstrate by simple examples that this approach has legs. At the moment, we haven't seen it walking. We've only heard it make a few sounds. So anybody who wants to say goodbye can say goodbye. Anybody that wants to stay can stay, and we can even turn the recording off, and then you can speak more openly.
I have things to do. So if there's not more focused on this, then I will make my departure. But we'll talk again.
Thank you for your incisive comments.
Sure.
This is Madeline from WGBH, and I just wanted to say, if you get to the point where you're ready to work with a partner with accessibility experience, particularly obviously if there's any funding, but for small amounts of interaction, even if there isn't, my team and I have experience on testing PDFs for accessibility, which obviously is something you're going to need to do at some point to see if you've really met your goals.
Oh, that is Charles.
No, I was going to say that Shamsi and I might talk to you, and I'm in Newton, Mass, Madeline. So
it turns out that I personally am not in Massachusetts, but my organization is. So I've just put my email address. It doesn't matter, right? We're all on Zoom.
I was going to say nobody's where they're supposed to be nowadays.
No, I've been doing it a little longer than most, but I put my email address in the chat. It's Madeline_Rothberg@wgbh.org. And we are ourselves a nonprofit and self-supporting, but for small amounts of checking in on things, I may be able to be helpful. But certainly if anybody is putting together an attempt to get some funding to really solve this problem thoroughly, we have worked with clients who need to create accessible PDFs for technical documents and would love to help make that possible.
That would be interesting.
While we're on this topic, do people know of the current US government mandate for open access, and in particular, not totally unrelated to that, NASA is declared 2023 the year of open science? Are people aware of that?
I read an article in the New York Times about the government has mandated something about open access of funded research.
Yeah. Well, the year of open science includes a fairly broad mandate on both research access, data, code, etc. But a component of it also is accessibility.
NASA is very strong on accessibility.
Yes, and there's
as is NOAA, I believe.
Yeah, and there's a specific program now for this called TOPS, and we're actually currently funded from TOPS, but there will be a future round of calls for proposals, and it would not be unwise to get it have to be US centered because NASA can't send money abroad in general, but it would not be unwise to try to get a group together to do a joint proposal on, well, it'd have to be scoped and it would have to be dependent on the amount of funding, etc. And NASA, it's a work commitment when you're essentially taking a mission for NASA when you get money from NASA. But that is maybe something to talk about further. And this will be happening very rapidly. The agency has 6 months to provide a plan to go forward and have everything implemented by 2025. But sorry, my dog has strong opinions on this. So
about a year ago, the administration put forward a call for funding relating to accessibility, and it's the assisted living capability, I think it was called. And there was an opportunity for funding that myself and Steve Jacobs had some conversations about, Steve knowing more about it than I did. And we never got at all close to making a funding proposal, but we made our best attempt and got nowhere. But we're small and not connected with larger institutions. So on the one hand, I'm more optimistic than on the other hand, I've got some experience of this sort of thing. And you're right, it's a short period of time, but it's worth making an effort for. And I will support it as best I can. And I hope the LaTeX 3 people will be able to support it as well. I see that there's both a complementarity and also a rivalry between myself and them. And I don't want it to be all the one and all the other.
And it could be both solutions can work for different, different kinds of documents. But just on the open access, yes, OSTP is the big thing now people are talking about. It's the sort of mirror of what we had in UK. We had Plan S, that everything that's government funded should be open. So it's the big talk of the town in publishing in the US. There's also UNESCO Open Science thingy, whatever it's called, but UNESCO wants open science. So there's open access is coming in, but open science, as Stein says, it's a big chunk of that coming with it as well. So
I think we've got enough here for another tech hour.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to organize it. Nelson.
Yeah, can I ask a question to Kaveh? Kaveh is the person in this group today who has the longest experience working with publishers. He's also one who's dealt extensively with XML, because publishers typically want XML markup added to input documents from authors, and they want PDF files to prepare their journals and books. So the question for Kaveh is, does the XML that's currently routinely produced by you and other people in your industry have these distinctions, such as this is a 2-column display rather than this is a table with 2 columns? And that's the first question. And the second question is, do you get pressure from publishers that you work with to be adding extra things that would improve accessibility?
Yes, but not strong. It's they're all talking about it, but there is no. It's not there yet. we want to get there, but it's not there yet. For example, the really big thing that we all want is accessible PDF. That which is a tough one, but as far as I know, it's not there yet. So the pressure is there, but it's not a major pressure, to be honest with you. Everyone wants it, but they haven't got it now. On the tables, I don't know quite what you mean. You mean actually have, if it's a 2-column table, what was that?
The question is, when you have a display of text on the screen that happens to be, say, a 2-column magazine or journal article, can you distinguish that from a table that has 2 columns? Because a blind person would need to be able to read those, knowing that I'm reading down columns, first the left column, then the right column. Or if it's a table, I might be reading it across by cells, and then row by row within the table. And it's a common problem with viewers.
Yeah. The sound's gone there, but I can see what you mean. It has to be tagged logically, so we tag as logically as we can, so that then we convert it. If it's a two column, we go from XML to PDF. If it's a 2-column, it'll create you the 2-column. Otherwise, it creates a single column. That, from what I know, I'm a little bit rusty, to be honest with you. My colleagues are doing all that work. But
I'm very pleased at how things have gone today at this meeting. I'm sorry if I've been a bit excitable at times. It's
been really useful, really wonderful. And thank you again, Jonathan, for, I really regret not having come to these sessions, but you know, your contribution has been fantastic. Guys, if you haven't seen this, they're all on YouTube like last year and year before, a huge amount of information. So thank you. And meeting all these new people, thank you very much. It's been great.
I really am going to take my leave now because this is going to get too interesting and drag on. But we may get in touch with some of you offline. Thanks.
I've got to
Yeah,
go too. Nice to meet you
I'll
all.
say bye as well, but I hope we continue the discussion.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.